I started playing piano before I knew how to read, and I took up violin shortly after that. And for whatever reason, I took to the instrument. So all of my childhood memories are filled with lessons and practicing and rehearsals and practicing and concerts and recitals and practicing. While other kids were out negotiating playground politics and navigating kickball, I was usually inside practicing. So by the time I was 12, I knew who I was. So did everybody else. I was a violinist. Then one day in junior high, the school music teacher wanted me to stand on my chair to play a section for the orchestra. I wasn't going to stand on a rickety folding chair and risk embarrassing myself in front of all my friends and falling and breaking the instrument my parents had gone to such expense to get me. I told him no. He became enraged. He looked at me and said, "You will stand on that chair or you will see someone about getting out of my class." So, with all of the defiance of a preteen girl, I looked him in the eye and said, "Good, I don't want to be in your damn class." As I turned to put my violin away, I felt the vice grip of a hand clamp down around my arm. I tried to get away. In a blink, he had flown from his podium and grabbed hold of me. All of a sudden, I was being thrown and tossed and pushed, slammed into the radiator, glass shattering under my hand as an overhead projector caught the weight of my fall. As I struggled to get free and he struggled to reaffirm his grip, I looked up at my friends. They were all staring at this scene. "Help me, please!" But I could see my friends were all paralyzed. My parents were called, and I was sent home for the rest of the week. When I returned on Monday, I had a dark purple bruise from my armpit to my hip. My wrists were swollen and sore, and I still had shards of glass embedded in my hand. No one asked how I was. My friends didn't even look at me in the hall, and the teacher was still teaching. I was confused, and I was angry. Then it dawned on me that maybe what had happened was really my fault. I mean, after all, I had disrespected my teacher. I even swore at him. I started to believe that it was my fault. I was to blame for what had happened. I was to blame for being assaulted. I was not fitting in anywhere. My friends were all in orchestra. I didn't have anybody. So I tried to fit in the best place that I could find, and that started a series of bad choices. Within the year, I was raped, and I told no one. Because deep down I believed it was my fault that it had happened to me. By the time I was 15, I was angry and out of control and not talking to anyone. So my parents did what any parent would do in that situation. They sent me to counseling, hoping that somebody would be able to reach me. Now it turns out that counseling is actually a trained listener whose whole job is to entice you to tell him or her your story. So why am I sharing my story with you today? Well, it turns out that by me telling you my story, it's the best way for us to connect. In fact, research is demonstrating that when we listen to a story, our brains are wired to hear that story. Paul Zak is a researcher in California, and he has been studying how brains respond when they listen to stories. And his data that he has collected has shown that blood samples and functional MRIs indicate that we produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and oxytocin, which is a pleasure chemical, when we're listening to a compelling story. What this means is, by listening to stories, our body produces chemicals that cause us to experience empathy. For those of us non-researchers, what this means is stories connect us and make us care. So my story continues by being a hostile kid being dragged into counseling and having the truth dragged out of me. And the truth at that point in time was I sucked at everything. I was not going to amount to anything. I made bad choices. And as he listened to why I stopped playing violin, it was in his empathetic response that I was able to hear information. Grown-ups are supposed to know better, and teenage girls make mistakes. I wasn't prepared for this, but because I could see the empathy and felt caring in that connection, I was able to take that information and consider that perhaps maybe I hadn't been at fault after all. So he asked me, if you're not going to be a violinist when you grow up, what do you want to be? And I said, well, I kind of want to be a therapist, but I'm really too messed up for that. And he said, you know, the best therapists are the ones that work on their own issues and then help people with the lessons that they learn. Today, people tell me their stories all the time. They even ask me to help rewrite their problems. I didn't become a bartender. I became that therapist. And every day I listen to stories. I've met the smartest kid in the class who can't ask for help because he sees it as a sign of weakness. I've met the child of an alcoholic who has to make a joke out of everything because anger is just too scary of an emotion to allow herself to feel. How many of us have stories that we've told ourselves in childhood to explain our experiences, but we've carried those stories into our adult lives as beliefs, and we find those beliefs no longer work for us? The really cool thing about this is that we get to rewrite our stories. So, fast forward a few years. 35 to be exact. I was approaching my 50th birthday, and I realized that there were parts of my story that I needed to still revise. I still believed that I could never play violin again. So I signed up for lessons, and I went over to my parents' house at 80 years old, and I said, I'm bringing the violin out of mothballs, Mom and Dad. And an incredible thing happened. They shared their story with me. You see, when the assault happened at school, it was 1975. My parents had been called to the school, and they were met by a variety of administrators and told that if my parents chose to pursue any kind of action against the teacher or the school, it would not go well for me. Back in 1975, people didn't take legal action against teachers or public officials, so my parents at the time thought that they were protecting me by withdrawing me from orchestra, and it really was only until it was too late that they had realized the impact of their decision. So 35 years later, we sat and shared our stories and rewrote them together. Things happen in life, and we create stories to explain our life experiences. Some of those stories become beliefs that we carry into our adult lives and no longer serve us well. But we all have the power to rewrite those stories. We just have to tell them to someone who will listen. Today, I've shared my story with you in hopes that it inspires you to think about some of the stories that you've brought with you from your childhood that might not be working for you so well anymore. Please tell your story to someone who will listen. You can rewrite history. Thank you.